Welcome to Blue Patch Chats. I'm Jane Langley and I'm going to be talking to Natalie Bennett, Green Party peer in the House of Lords and former leader of the Green Party. Natalie's written a book called Change Everything. It's a vision for a sustainable, fair economy, and she's going to tell us more in this short interview.
So I'm Natalie Bennett, former Green Party leader, Green Party member of the House of Lords. And what I've been working on a lot lately is my first book. The title is Change Everything, Common Sense Politics for the Age of Shocks. And I'm publishing with Unbound, which is a small independent publisher with a unusual business model based on people pre-subscribing, crowdfunding the book. And when I've raised enough money for that, it will go into production and hopefully about a year's time, it will come out. What this book says is, as the title gives away, what we're doing now, our current systems, economic, social, environmental, political, educational, are really unsustainable in the broadest sense. They're going to have to change, and we need to create a model of positive change for a society that works for people and planet.
That's a fantastic vision, Natalie. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak to me. I'm Jane Langley from Blue Patch, and we're really honoured to have you on a Zoom call today to just talk more about your vision for the future and the kind of, really profound changes that need to happen. I've got some very specific questions which come from the fact that Blue Patch is a community of small sustainable businesses in the UK. And one of the things we're really keen to find out is what do you think the three key factors are that you think need to change?
Okay, well, particularly looking from that small business frame, I would say that one of the first things, what the book starts with, chapter 1 talks about the idea of a universal basic income, which is the idea that everybody gets a payment every week enough to meet their basic needs. And what that means is, from a small business perspective, but also from a creative perspective, is that everyone has the chance, if they've got a great idea to start a small independent business, if they really want to be a composer or a musician or a novelist, if you've got the universal basic income, it's only a basic income, but it's enough to live on, and you can take the time, put your energy and talents towards what you think is something that you can really contribute to. So from a small independent business at the moment, say you're a single mum with a couple of children, it's astonishingly difficult to start your own business. It requires extraordinary bravery, because we all know that small businesses don't always succeed, not, for reasons sometimes entirely outside their own control. We know that income for small businesses goes up and down, particularly in the early years, in a really uncertain way. And if you had a UBI, that would be a foundation for people to set up small independent businesses. So chapter 1 of the books talks about the universal basic income. The second part, after that, I talk about education and then about politics. But then the second part of the book deliberately is about the economy, and because I think the economy should be there to serve people, not people living to serve the economy. But one of the things I stress about the economy is an intuition, and my first degree is agricultural science. By training, I'm a scientist, is an understanding that comes from ecology. We know that stable, secure, resilient ecosystems are ones that have huge amount of variety in them. And if we're going to have strong local economies that meet the needs of the community in those local economies, they need to be based on small independent businesses and cooperatives. The idea where you have an economy dominated by a big 5 or 6, and if you look at the food system, and this is another area where we desperately need diversity in our food consumption. More than 50% of our calories come from just 3 food crops, which is deeply dangerous. And that's associated with the fact that we have a small number of seed companies, a small number of agrochemical companies, a small number of supermarkets, small number of multinational companies manufacturing food. All the way along the line, we've just narrowed down to a lack of diversity. Small businesses give us that diversity, give us this bounded, I can think of a small business I know in Sheffield that makes jams collected from hedgerows, wild food. That's an example of the kind of diversity in all kinds of ways that small business brings us. And then in terms of the third idea that I'd really stress is we need to think a lot about resilience. We've been chasing efficiency, which has literally meant the cheapest price, the biggest profits. And that's given us the really unstable, insecure world we have now. If we actually need to think about how we build a resilient society, one that can stand up to shocks, and that's why the term age of shocks is there in the title of my book, because, if you think about it, the climate emergency, floods, droughts, fires, all of those things are obvious. The COVID pandemic, there are many more medical risks that we face, which are related in significant part to our destruction of ecosystems. There's, of course, the geopolitical shocks of our deeply unstable world. And the final section of the book talks about why geopolitically our world is so unstable and how we can start to change that. But so there's those three things: a UBI that gives people individual security, a rich ecosystem of small businesses, that being the basis of the economy, and thirdly, a government that's utterly focused on resilience. How can we keep everyone safe and secure and ensure their basic needs are met?
Yes, I mean, that's a very important vision, and at Blue Patch we totally support that and agree with that. One of the things, because we work with small businesses and we're noticing it all the time, is that access to retail space in the high street is well out of reach of most small businesses. And in fact, where we're based, which is Herne Hill in South London, there are many local shops which have been empty for 5 years. And the rents are off the scale, 55,000 a year, and then rates on top. And the small businesses can't afford to set up there. So you've got empty high streets, and small businesses forced to go and leave the area, go and work in the back rooms of pubs as opposed to on the high street. So there seems to be this kind of control of property that's taking it out of reach of small businesses. And we think you could have a really massively thriving local economy if these businesses could reach out to the customers. So there's this gap.
Very much so. And I mean, there's so many things behind that. I'm at the moment working on the Financial Services and Markets Bill, and we've had a financialisation of the economy. And many of those small shops will very likely be owned by big investors overseas, quite likely by rather mysterious companies based in tax havens that are owned by company in this tax haven, followed by company in that tax haven, and it may be extraordinarily difficult to actually find who really owns it, who has the beneficial ownership of it. So we've had the local control has disappeared. We've also got local councils who a decade of austerity has just utterly hollowed out local councils and taken away their capacity to support their local economy in a way they might have done. So we've got those problems. I mean, looking at that sort of practical thing, I was actually talking to a journalist this week. How do we actually get to the situation where if there's an empty shop and it sits empty for 6 months, council body, Quango, whatever, takes it over and says, can we set this up as a 10 tables around the room of this small shop, and small businesses can, rent a table for 10, 20 pounds a day, whatever it is. How can we set up to get those micro businesses, to get people who are just starting out in business, to give them space on the high street? And of course that, potentially, if we think about some of the places around the country that are sort of famous for being interesting, fun places, like, York, for example, the old medieval area, and okay, they've got that lovely architecture to start with, but it's lots of small independent shops that makes it different and exciting and fun to visit. Camden Market's an area I happen to know well, and if you go there, you hear multiple European languages. People come from around Europe for the small independent differences, the different sorts of culture. Now, the culture of Camden Market and the culture of York Shambles are two very different kinds of culture, and they attract different types of tourists. But in both cases, the foundation is difference. We come back to the point I was making about ecology. Something that's rich and fun and tasty is something that's varied. A whole lot of all the normal boring chain stores that you find on every single street, in every train station. Where's the fun? That's one of the things. Our society has become so dull and tasteless because everything's, ultra processed food produced by multinationals. So it tastes the same all across the country and indeed all around the world.
Yes. Yeah, there's a real problem of lack of diversity. And what I find absolutely fascinating with how you're talking about diversity in the high street is that the Blue Patch model, so we represent small sustainable businesses, the actual model was inspired by observing diversity of pollination in a wildlife meadow in Wakehurst Place, and observing all different sizes of pollinator and how this kind of kept the ecosystem going. And in a way, the economy is very similar to that. You need different sizes of pollinators, you need diversity. And at one point in this wildlife meadow, when I was thinking about this model, suddenly a great shadow came overhead and a giant bee came over the fields, and it was the Amazon bee. And it was like as if the Amazon bee was just kind of sort of wiping out everything. And it's this monoculture, which is the same in, you know, food supplies. It's the monoculture mentality is so dangerous for a rich and diverse economy. You know, it just leaves people out. It will remove diversity.
And I mean, we're actually speaking on Food Diversity Day, and I've actually been at some call on some webinars on that, and will be again later. And one of the things we're slowly starting to realise, and so much of what we took as common sense, the old common sense, the failed, not at all common sense, was the idea that we just rely on these handful of foodstuffs and we produce them at enormous scale and use large amounts of fossil fuels, large amounts of pesticides. Because, of course, if you produce a great expanse of identical rapeseed plant or similar, or wheat, all you're saying to all the predators and all the pests is, come here, feast here, and then you end up having to use huge amounts of costly imports. And that's, we have this idea that our current economy is efficient, but practically speaking, it's costing us the planet. That ultra-processed food is very often wrapped in plastic. It's sold in all sorts of single-use packaging that gets used for 5 minutes and will exist in the environment for hundreds of years. All of those things, this idea of what supposedly is efficient is actually deeply inefficient and trashing our world.
Yeah. We totally agree with that. Going back to the locals, a very local story to us, again, talking about the large players and efficiency of scale. So we've got a local greengrocer who's at the point of giving up after 20 years because of it's so difficult to deal with HMRC and with rates and with COVID relief that was suddenly drawn back from them. And I think what I observe with small businesses where they really struggle is having the mental space to kind of get their heads around accounts when they've been up at 3 a.m. going to the vegetable market, they're already on an exhaustion deficit. And then they have to do all the other stuff on top. So the amount of tasks that a small business has to deal with compared with a corporate, which would have many different departments and able to share these tasks, already means that we need to give extra support to small businesses to help them through all this.
And of course, what we've got is the very opposite of that. We don't have a level playing field. Big multinational companies, as you say, unavoidably, they have got their PR department and their accounts department and their tax dodging department, although it probably won't be called that, but, they'll have 20 subsidiaries based in the Cayman Islands, and that's where lots of their money goes. And so this is an extremely unequal situation. And one of the ways in which we used to acknowledge that difference was it used to be that the corporate tax rate, the tax rate that was applied to the biggest companies, was 10 percentage points higher than it was for small business. Now, what happened was under Blair, that differential was reduced, and under Cameron, it disappeared altogether. So, one of the things we should be doing is taxing the big corporates more and creating that cushion in for the smaller businesses, so that it helps to balance this out. But it's also, why are big businesses allowed to get away with imposing so many costs on so many of us? And the obvious example for this is Amazon, the website. I call it the great parasite. It produces massive quantities in the UK and around the world, massive quantities of plastic waste, packaging. You think about any street you go down, look in the bins, you'll find almost invariably significant amounts of Amazon packaging. We're all paying to dispose of that. On the road, there will be lorries running up and down on your road, outside your road today, carrying Amazon parcels. Amazon pays effectively no taxes. It doesn't pay for the costs of any of those. So it imposes all of those costs on the rest of us. And it's the way in which multinational companies have been, in the technical jargon, externalized costs. They've been allowed to impose those externalized costs on it. You think of, and I'm picking one, but I could pick any of a dozen, Primark. Maybe you can go into Primark and buy a £5 t-shirt. But the cost of that £5 t-shirt is enormous. It may well be that the cotton was picked in Azerbaijan by children who were forced out of school, shipped over using fossil fuels, shipped over to China, spun into cloth in a factory where the dye spews out into the local river, shipped down to Bangladesh. And after Rana Plaza, tragically, we know about sweatshops in Bangladesh, which haven't really improved since. Fossil fuels shipped back to the UK, sold in a shop where people are on 0 hours contract, minimum wage. The costs of that £5 t-shirt are enormous. But of course, lots of people, this is where we come to the cyclical structural problem. If you've got a job interview on Monday and you can only afford that £5 t-shirt, because you need a crisp white t-shirt underneath your good jacket for the job interview, then you're going to buy that £5 t-shirt, even though you probably know it'll only survive 2 washes and then fall to pieces. Yeah. And so it's not that it's great if individuals do whatever they can, but I'm not really interested in individual behaviour. I'm concerned with system change so that the real price is on that price tag in the multinational chain store. And that means then, a small independent business, which perhaps starts with growing some hemp in Kent, spins it up in a local factory, and a local seamstress or a local small company sews it up in a factory, cooperative factory, then you're actually getting to some sort of parity. And we're just so far from that world at the moment. And we need to get to that world in which everyone has a fair chance, which small independent businesses just don't at the moment.
Yes, yeah, no, that's totally right. We need to even the playing field. One of the very uneven playing fields that we've noticed is with the net zero laws, the legislation that's coming into place for small businesses. And I would be interested in your view on that, because one of the things I noticed in 2019, before the pandemic, I was hearing net zero talked about, and I was joining sort of meetings and conferences around net zero, which was very much corporate led. There'd be PwC and there'd be consultants there, and I was listening in, trying to understand the whole thing. And I thought, blimey, we've got all these sustainable businesses, they're tiny businesses, how are they going to deal with this? I'm only just picking up what it means. So I spent the pandemic getting to grips with it, and I wrote a very simple program to myth bust the whole net zero thing, so our businesses could train and actually really audit for no money at all, really audit their emissions. And the fantastic consultants Green Element created a calculator called Compare Your Footprint. I tested loads of calculators. They were all doing offset, selling offset. And I found this one, and it was just the real thing. No offset being sold. And it was like really, really solid. So I learned how to use it. And Compare Your Footprint. The team are lovely. They're an SME based here, and they've been joining in and helping our businesses. And we're now stepping small businesses through the process of auditing scope 1, 2, and then getting to grips with scope 3 emissions. And from where I'm seeing, I think we're probably the only social enterprise that actually has this free program in place that will actually deliver scope reports for small business. And I'm wondering why there's this huge gap of information, because I'm talking to small businesses that aren't members and they've never heard of net zero. They've no idea. So why is there this information gap? Why aren't the government kind of informing everyone?
Well, yes, I mean, the government and net zero is a very big subject. We could do a whole podcast on it itself. But I think to pick out a couple of things, I mean, you put a huge amount of useful information there, and it's great to know that it does exist. But of course, the problem is it is so hard to find. One of the problems is, the net zero agenda has been captured by the big corporates, and what they very often are talking about is business as usual with added technology. And so we're going to keep the economy exactly the same way as it is, but we're going to have electric cars and solar panels. So we've got all this technology. So, the whole model of this is the suggestion of either, you buy a whole lot of expensive technology, you replace your technology when you're coming around on your normal cycle in the way that big business does, because that's also a tax deduction and all the rest of it. Lots of that won't apply to small independent businesses in the same kind of way. continuing to use the technology you've already got is going to mean you're not going to create a lot of carbon emissions from buying a new bit of kit. It won't always work that way, but sometimes it will. And also the fact that we've got to have social innovation. And of course, small businesses are actually people very often who are doing this and doing things differently, but that doesn't necessarily get counted in some of the standard kind of calculators. And of course, if you're already starting off really well, then actually say, well, I'm going to try and cut things, you get to the really thin margins and, you need to be able to count things like if you're a small local business and most of your customers come on foot or cycle, well, there's a huge bonus in there, and it's not necessarily anything that's going to show up even in your scope 3, but that's the basis of your business. So you've got to be able to sort of make a real allowance for all of those things. But I think, it's really important to say also that, you identified rightly, offsetting is a con. That's my bottom line, because offsetting is being used by people like airlines, and big people shipping huge amounts of goods around the world to say, oh, we're going to use all this fossil fuel, but that's all right, we're going to plant some trees. First of all, we need to plant, or at least allow to regrow, lots and lots of trees and stop using fossil fuels. It's not an either or, we need to do both. And offsetting is just a way for people to be able to find excuses to keep going when actually they need to change their business model. We need much less stuff in our life. We need, one of my favorite figures is in a decade, the volume of clothing sold in the UK, and this was up to about 2019, the volume of clothing in the UK sold doubled. Now, I don't remember people in 2009 going around naked or in rags. There is just so much waste in the fast fashion business. And, one of the things that used to be on every high street and has largely disappeared is shops that repair clothes. And that's partly because things are being sold so apparently cheaply that people don't think about repairing, but also the quality of the clothes is such that they're not even worth repairing. The charity shops say lots of the stuff they get is just such terrible quality, it's not worth reselling. So there's so much in the current business model that's broken, and changing it, it will be good for small business and will also, take us in the net zero direction.
You've read my mind. This is really uncanny. This morning, I was researching tailors and making a list of sustainable tailors who will do alterations and repairs. So this is a big sector of the local economy that we want to start bringing onto Blue Patch, so that people can actually walk to their local repair person and get stuff, copied or repaired or altered after their Christmas lunch or whatever. So I think I totally agree. We need to have the service-based economy coming through locally, and that'll make a really big difference.
Not just clothing, it's also, repair cafes. And, this is something that's been happening at a social enterprise or a volunteer level. Many, many moons ago, it must have been about 2008, we had one Green councillor on Islington Council, and she set up, I think, one of the first repair shops with some local government funding. And it was, you could literally take in pretty well anything you could think of, anything you could carry into the shop. You could take it in, and if it was in any way feasible, they'd work out a way to fix it. And that's, your coffee table with the broken leg, your microwave, your whatever. Now, the huge problem, of course, is, there's a whole campaign called Right to Repair, and they've got a manifesto and, really interesting things being done is, let's have a repair place that you can just take pretty well anything, and they'll be the sort of people who've got the skills to fix pretty well anything, in your local high street. And also, down in the southwest, I learnt the invaluable fact that the average electric drill gets used for 15 minutes in its lifetime. And we've got in a few places around the country now what they call a library of things. And so if you've got that one shelf you want to put up to put on the wall, rather than going and buying an electric drill, you go and borrow it from the shop, use it for the 2 minutes you're going to use it, take it back. When your child decides that they want to learn the guitar, rather than buying a guitar and 5 lessons later they've entirely lost interest and it just gathers dust in the loft, you go and borrow one. And maybe if the child gets really into it, you will buy something better or more carefully fitted or whatever, but you can try it out first. And, one of these I visited, they did have a lot of pasta machines, lots of people who donated pasta machines, but, lots of things, you try out once and maybe you don't stick with.
Yes, I agree. So that goes back to, you need spaces to be liberated in the high street. So these companies are holding property as securities everywhere. These multinationals, that somehow needs to be released. That property needs to come back into community use. I visited Goldfinger workshops in the Trellick Towers yesterday, and I was absolutely blown away by the project, because not only have they got the workshops there and are making this superb furniture from wood that's been felled in London by tree surgeons and seasoned, so it's all got a really local footprint, and it's wood that had to come down. So not only have they got that, they're also training local apprentices, and they're starting to work in schools as well. So they're giving local kids, this experience of woodworking and running a workshop. But also part of that space, they have sublet to a restaurant, which has created a community kitchen. The food is just incredible. I had lunch there. It's absolutely delicious. It's nothing like chain food. It's real food that's cooked on site. But on Sunday, they make over 200 meals for people who are vulnerable in the community. Volunteers come into that kitchen, volunteer chefs, leftover food from local restaurants and shops comes in, and they provide food for 200 people and throughout COVID, they did that as well. The whole kitchen was serving the community. So this is the beautiful thing about a social enterprise. They really are in their own community, serving the community and bringing people together. And when I was there, I could see, all walks of life were in that cafe eating really healthy food.
And if you think about it, I mean, we've been talking mostly about the high streets, but there's also, already we're seeing it, and we'll see it a lot more, out of town shopping centres that are totally, that are really struggling and, emptying out, etc. I mean, way back in 2006, I wrote a piece for The Guardian that was rather roundly mocked, because I said, imagine all of those car parks outside shopping centres being turned into allotments. You can put raised beds even on top of the asphalt and raise food. But that's the kind of thing that we're going to have to find something to do with those things. And, I visited in Sweden, there's a shopping centre that's entirely repurposed, recycled, upcycled. There's as you'd expect in a shopping centre, there's a couple of clothes shops, there's a couple of furniture shops, there's some knick-knack shops. But what's different about it is everything there is recycled. And they also had a lovely cafe. And when I was there, admittedly, I was there in there was about a foot of snow. So it wasn't kind of food growing season. I don't think they've got to the food growing yet, but it's the obvious next step. And, you look at, in terms of food growing, Incredible Edible in Todmorden, started out on a small scale locally, is now a movement around the world. There are so many places where we can grow food. They've built a new doctor's surgery, and every plant in the car park produces something edible. And it's not quite that you walk outside and the doctor says, right, pick 3 apples off that tree and that's your prescription. It's a little bit like that.
Yes, this takes back to your universal income. So in a way, if that was available, then maybe more people would have the time and energy to start cultivating and developing all these local projects, because at the moment everyone's so anxious to try and bring in enough money to live that they're just taking any job going.
And that's what the government forces them to do. And actually, you've just reminded me, I did a really brilliant event on universal basic income with Galgale, which is a wonderful little community group in the East End of Glasgow. And it actually started out as a protest against a planned motorway that was going through a wood. And so because of that, there was fallen wood, and that they were working with wood. And they're now a woodwork shop that works with people with drug and alcohol and mental health issues. And hearing an economist there talking about the fact that actually, having people having a really low rate of unemployment and forcing people into the first job they can possibly grab is actually, is incredibly poor in terms of your output, because people end up in jobs they're wildly unsuited to. It's not good for them. It's not good for the companies. If you actually have time for people to look around and find out what works for them, But also, even more than that, one of the volunteers at Galgale said to me, you know, this is a community that's really short on jobs. We have a real problem. We have people not being able to find a job. But there is absolutely no shortage of things that need doing. You know, there's an enormous amount that needs doing in this community, and lots of people who want to do it. But, you know, they're trying to squeeze it into, you know, they're working a 48-hour job and all the rest of it, and try to survive on that basis.
Yes. And as you say, some of the jobs are in a way unproductive because of all the externalities. You know, when you're peddling fast fashion or fast food, the externality would far outweigh the economic benefit to the country anyway. So you're in a job, but as you said, there are so many things that need doing, need attending to. You know,
the late great David Graeber's term, which I, you know, it's a technical term, so I can use it. Bullshit jobs, and lots of people are stuck in bullshit jobs.
Yeah. So I came across an interesting point talking to some businesses recently, and it's about VAT registration. So this is a rather dry subject, I know, VAT. But what I come across is quite a few businesses that suddenly stop selling because they don't want to get into the VAT bracket. Because with a small business, what tends to happen is you can have a really good year, it's feast and famine, and then you can have a rubbish year. And the cost of actually running your VAT and accountancy fees and the whole kind of management of that is so daunting to quite a few small businesses that are on the brink that they actually pull back. And in a way, that's quite negative for the economy. And I was wondering if there was any kind of thoughts around VAT and how there could be a kind of, should we say, a zone in the VAT, like £10,000 or whatever, where you could actually take that extra money and kind of plough it back into the sustainability of your business, like taking it to switch to renewable energy account or do insulation on your workshops and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I mean, in terms of the book, I'm kind of looking at the big picture, more in the big picture kind of stuff, rather than the sort of fine policy detail. One of the things I set out with this book, which I may not quite have achieved, was to set the aim of not going more than 200 pages. So I suspect it might drift out to 220. But in that, I'm sort of covering every different angle. So I'm not getting down to that level of detail. But I think, you know, what we're doing is we need to start again and look at the system and say, you know, this system is not working. Now, I think one of the things that we could do with that is change it to making it, as one academic suggested to me, it should be termed a rubbish tax, and so, or a damage tax. Sorry, damage tax was the word I was looking for. So that on goods could vary according to, you know, this is one of the ways you can capture those externalized costs we were talking about before. And so if you're a small local business, you know, you're the greengrocer, well, okay, it's not that, but, you know, you're some small local business using all local suppliers, and it's all, you know, net zero, and you're producing very, you know, you carefully manage it so there's very little or no waste, then actually what you're going to have if you have a damage tax instead of VAT is you're going to be zero anyway, because you've actually you're not doing the damage. Whereas, you know, if you want to be that big multinational shipping goods all around the world and finishing them in 3 places and all the rest of it, then actually you're going to end up with an awful lot of damage tax because you're capitalizing those externalized costs. So on a big structural scale, if you actually have, instead of, you know, in a revenue neutral way, you go from VAT to a damage tax, then actually I think what you would actually find is a vast number of small businesses would just disappear out of the system automatically because they're operating in a sustainable way.
I think that's very visionary. I think a lot of our members would find that fantastic. And in fact, talking about damage tax, one of the things we're doing is we're actually partnering with the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, and we're looking at all their waste streams with them, and it's going to be a fantastic journey. So we're going to bring lots of our members through to use all their materials and to repurpose them and recycle them. So what we're doing is we're looking at a whole structure for this, from tiny businesses to people who are material scientists, to see that what can happen with waste streams and turn them back into things that people really want. So yeah, that's an exciting project for us, but the damage tax would be so helpful.
Well, we talk about a circular economy, and I've actually got a written question down with the government at the moment. It would appear to be that the rules have changed. That means that old sofas and that local councils are not able to collect them anymore. But the fact that the whole structure of our economy. I mean, I once when I first moved to the UK, I bought a sofa, and after 10 years, it was just absolutely dead, and there was no practical way of refurbishing it. Whereas my grandmother in Australia, when she was married, they bought a sofa, and when after her 50th wedding anniversary, and they eventually moved out, she still had the same sofa. And so we have so many problems there. But what we're talking about is social innovation. And I think, looking at the bigger picture here, one of the problems is people think, oh, it's so hard to change. But we've forgotten how much things have changed just in the last 20, 30, 40 years. I think if we look at, I don't believe in perfect circular theories of history, but if you look at from after the Second World War, there was 35 or 40 years of a social democratic consensus. It was also a period that the economists called the Great Leavening. Inequality was not at great speed, but gradually going down and down and down. What happened then was you have the election of Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan in the States, the rise of neoliberalism, neo-Thatcherism, call it what you like. And this was an economy that was built on greed is good, inequality doesn't matter, government bad, private good, we're going to privatize everything. That's now been going for 35 or 40 years. It's clearly failed. If you look at those two things together, both of those things were built on the idea of growth, of more and more stuff. Now, you can argue immediately after the Second World War period, country had been bombed to hell. It was neat, there was things needed to be rebuilt, houses need to be built, etc. But what we've done since is just keep chasing this chimera of growth. We've got a failed model. So it's really time for a change, and political change happens in big leaps. It doesn't actually happen slowly and gradually. And what we're seeing now is, the kind of project you're just talking about with the Royal Opera House. At a small scale, locally in many different ways, people are doing things differently. But at the moment, the system makes it really difficult in all kinds of ways. There's rules, there's limitations. So what we have to do is free up this flowering that's actually happening there at the grassroots level, get to a system where we acknowledge that we have to stop chasing growth, that we need a resilience, that we need to have the variety in our life, in our economy, in our food, in everything, and value all of those things and support all of those things. Change will happen. We can see from the historical pattern that change happens in sudden big jumps. And now we're at the point where we are going to see change. Where we are now is profoundly unstable. And, I would say that it splits two ways. It either splits in the kind of green, small g green direction I'm talking about, or it goes to the far right model, which says, oh, it's a difficult, dangerous world. We've got to grab what we can for us and ours and shove those others away, whoever those others are, build walls to keep them out. Whereas the green philosophy, the green understanding is there's enough resources on this planet for everyone to have a decent life if we just share them out fairly. And if we empower everyone, we haven't talked much about politics today, but, we need people to know that politics can what they do not have done to them. People, empowered people making choices for themselves and their own communities, those can be often local communities, but they'll also, these days with our technology, they might be a community of people who are very interested in steam trains or something. They can get together on the internet and do all sorts of exciting things about steam trains. People getting together, being able to shape their world. That's what I call politics. And common sense is we've got all these human resources, all this human capacity, and most of it is squashed down and not used at the moment. We need an economy, a society that frees all that wonderful human potential to build a new kind of world. We're going to have to build a new world. It has to change, and we can do it in ways that work for people and planet.
Yes, I think that's exactly where we kind of coincide here perfectly, because what we notice is when we get our small business members together, it is electrifying. There's a complete joy in how they work together. They share resources, they support each other, they have a laugh, something that's often missing. But actually what they are together is they are more resilient and they're resourceful. And this is like it could be such a joyful economy. People could be so much better off if this was allowed to flower. So yes, I really agree with you. We need to change everything, and very, very much look forward to reading your book when it's out and sharing it with everyone else. And let's hope that that can really sort of really trigger all this cascading change from politics to everyday life. So
exactly, that's right. Empower everybody, get people cooperating, giving them the chance to cooperate and get together, and build a wonderful, flourishing society.
So
Thanks very much.
How can people get the book though, Natalie? Before we
all right, okay, the little advertising bit. The easy way probably is www. I'm sure we'll put a link in here somewhere, but bit.ly/change everything age shocks. But if you also go to the Unbound website, you'll find it there. So Unbound, change everything, age of shocks, any kind of combination of search engine, I'm sure will get you to that. Or indeed you can find it on the front page of my website, Natalie Bennett, BENNETT.org.
That's brilliant. Well, we'll obviously put a link in, and you can buy an advance copy, can't you? Because it's been crowdfunded. So
exactly, and buy an advance copy and get your name in the book, so your contribution will be there and visible and obvious. And that starts from £10 for an ebook, upwards from there. And anyone who's got some real extra cash lying around, there's some nice extra bonus bits in there if you'd like to put a bit more in.
I bought my copy already and I can't wait to read it. So thank you very much, Natalie. It's been really wonderful talking to you, and we look forward to reading the book and changing everything. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. And, to all the small business people and perhaps people who are thinking about setting up a small business out there, well done, go for it, and good luck.
Thank you.